Mike Tyson was a bad man, and now you can read about his life and career with the new book out now by my guy Mark Kriegel titled Baddest Man, The Making of Mike Tyson. Speaking of Mark, we're now welcomed by legendary analyst, journalist, and author Mark Kriegel, my dear friend who I have not seen in a very long time. Quaco, do you have my pictures? I just want to throw it back real quick. So Kriegel and I used to spend a lot of late nights together.
Early mornings.
Early, whatever you want to call it. I think our call time was 10 p.m. in LA. Do we have those? There we go. And there's his Rob Ryan. Can you see him to the right?
Thank you, Molly.
Wow, look at
The
that.
world
Kriegel
really
hasn't
needed to
aged
see
a
that.
Look at that.
Unbelievable. Are you still as neurotic as ever?
Absolutely.
There we go. All right, let's get into this.
Mark and I go back. We used to work at the New York Daily News together, Molly. He was a columnist when I was a high school writer there.
My goodness.
I think I was actually covering cops when he was a high school writer.
I think everyone's come.
And he broke a lot of news.
A long way.
Yeah, he was good. And don't forget, Mark wrote the books on Namath and Pete Maverick, too. He wrote the two great books. Anyway, you may continue.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into this Mike Tyson book. What surprised you most as you researched and wrote this about Mike?
First of all, that I liked him after years of bashing him as a columnist. What surprised me most was that how much he loves fighters. In the absence of like a family that he grew up with, in many respects, I think fighters became his family. You know, he wept when Mark Breland lost. He gladly carried Edwin Rosario's spit bucket into the ring. But even the legends, even guys who passed away were real to him. There's a scene in the book where he's watching Sonny Liston fight, and he starts to weep. Guy says, "Mike, you crying?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Well, because I can never beat him." "Well, what's the matter with you? You can never beat him. You're never going to fight him. He's dead. You're alive." He goes, "Oh, no, 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 no. I fight him all the time up here." And the whole fraternity of fighting, living, dead, whatever, historical, they were real to him.
Mark,
Yeah.
when you look at Mike Tyson, having spoken to him before you wrote this book or while you were writing this book, we know how you felt about him at the time you were writing about him because you told us. We know how he is now. How would he describe himself as a human being back then? If you're talking to him now, what would he say about the young Mike Tyson?
That's a great question. I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but I think that he would say that he was immature, that he was, it's an interesting question. He was handled unlike anybody else in the history of this sport. He was made into an attraction unlike anyone else. He's the most lucrative attraction in the history of the sport. And I don't think he got to know himself until much later. You know, he's trying out certain personas. And one of the things that's interesting with Mike, and I think that makes him an easier person to deal with, a nicer person, is that he stopped fighting. Customato, his original trainer, had this whole almost theological concept of fear, you know, how to deal with the bully. But the role Mike played in the ring was a bully. He manipulated the fear. He put the fear back on the opponent. And that has a price. I think that the whole idea of Mike Tyson and the reason we're so attracted, one of the reasons we're addicted to him, was that idea of fear, the idea of the bully writ large. So I think that my suspicion is that it was an uncomfortable role for him to play. He always had to be the scariest guy in the room. And he played that role very, very well.
Pull on a China shop. Yeah. Now, you end the book in '88, and a lot happened with Mike between '88 and beyond. You know, whether it's Buster Douglas at the Tokyo Dome, cutting off Holyfield's ear. If you wrote the book then, and it was over in '88, would you ever have perceived all the travails that hit Tyson after that?
No, I mean, it was one. Everyone has their own process about writing a book. Even if the guy hates me, if I'm going to do a biography on someone, I have to love them. Now, I bashed this guy left, right, center. He was like the designated villain in my column, and I had to reconsider it. Can I learn to love Mike Tyson? The answer, obviously, yes, because I am so surprised by what happened after '88. And I think, you don't judge a guy, you get older, you grow up a little bit, you don't judge a guy necessarily by who he knocked out, but by what he survived. And in the case of Tyson, it's booze, it's drugs, it's the kind of fame that could kill you in a lethal dose. It's boxing itself, it's incarceration, it's the death of a child. And I look at what this guy survived, and I think, hey, I got to tip my hat. There's some virtue in him being alive.
Mark, do you have some regrets in how you covered him?
Yes. I mean, I have regrets on how I covered a lot of people. I mean, and I think Chris may or may not remember, but, I got the column by accident. And especially at that time, the first thing they tell you is like, you got to be a tough guy. And there's a lot of proving and preening in the column. And yeah, I regret a lot of it.
Stephen A.?
Molly, just before I ask my last question, keep in mind that this man was a columnist at the New York Daily News. That was a place where the great Bill Madden, Mr. Baseball, wrote his baseball columns. The great Mike Lupica has been a general sports columnist for decades, the voice of New York in a lot of people's eyes. One of my all-time favorites, one of the greatest writers in history, Ian O'Connor. And even though I had aspirations and I ultimately became a columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, those were the guys, Mark Kriegel and all of those guys were the ones that set the standard, that showed me how it was done. The Mike Wilbons of the world and others, of course, the Godfather. But the guys that I worked with at the New York Daily News, watching them work every day, watching how they projected their voices onto the masses from New York's perspective was second to none. So I'm always eternally grateful for the work Kriegel and Ian O'Connor and Lupica and Madden and those guys did. They were absolutely phenomenal. Last question for you, Mark. When you see, in writing this book and talking about Mike Tyson, I'm interested in knowing, did you speak, whether it's to former fighters from back in the old days or present-day fighters or fighters that recently retired? I'm interested in knowing how his contemporaries view him and how they feel about Mike Tyson, because every time I run across any fighter, they speak to him, despite all of his troubles, with nothing but the utmost reverence when they talk about Mike Tyson. Your thoughts?
Even a guy whom he really wanted to hurt, and he did, speaks reverentially about Tyson. It goes back to something I said before about fighters being his family. I can't tell you how many times, typically the last act of a fighter's life when he leaves the ring is the tragic one. That's where all the bad movies are made. I can't tell you how many times I heard about Mike breaking off 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, burying a guy, really helping busted out fighters. So again, I think that this idea of fighters being his family is an authentic one. But you're right in what you notice, because fighters love him.
Can't wait. Baddest man, the making of Mike Tyson. Mark Kriegel, so good to see you.
Thank you.
We're
Great
all
to
happy.
see you, Molly. Great to see you, Chris.
Little reunion. All
Great to see you, Stephen.
You know what?